Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about obsession. Gollum from Lord of the Rings said, "Precious, precious, precious, my precious, oh my precious." Gollum's obsession with a golden ring led him to destroy everything else in his life. The Lord of the Rings movies were filmed in the extremely beautiful country of New Zealand, which has one international airport at Auckland. The only ways to get to New Zealand are either through the Auckland airport or by boat. I know lots of people who used to vacation there regularly. But foreign tourism is essentially gone in New Zealand now because they've shut their borders due to the coronavirus. A few years ago at the Wellington airport, they put up an exhibit showing Gollum grabbing for a fish. Gollum was very good at focusing on a single goal while ignoring what was happening to the rest of his life. That concept is the theme of this video. And today there's some good news out of New Zealand. New Zealand has gone 100 days without community transmission of COVID-19. And here's a tweet of congratulations from the Prime Minister of Fiji. Fiji and New Zealand are now among the only countries on Earth to go 100 days or more without cases of COVID-19 in our communities. Well done to the New Zealand government and people. Your friends in Fiji have all been rooting for your success. Look at that big smile on the New Zealand Prime Minister's face. She's been singularly obsessed with eliminating the coronavirus inside the borders of her country. Of course, in order to do this, she had to shut down the international tourism industry in her country. There used to be almost 250,000 people employed in the tourism industry in New Zealand. New Zealand has less than 5 million people, so that's a huge segment of their population which is no longer able to earn a living. Tourism used to be their biggest export industry, contributing 21% of foreign exchange earnings. All of that revenue has disappeared over the last 6 months, every penny of it. According to the New Zealand Herald, the incredibly beautiful west coast of New Zealand has been abandoned. And the New Zealand Herald says the wreckage of our tourism industry paints a picture in which there is little life and so very little hope. So the Prime Minister has eliminated the virus from the island, and all she had to do was destroy the livelihoods of 229,000 people. A few weeks ago, the virus snuck across the borders, and she called in the military to defeat it. And she also had to eliminate civil rights. An enforcement officer may enter without a warrant any land, building, craft, vehicle, place, or thing if they have reasonable grounds to believe that a person is failing to comply with any aspect of a Section 11 order. Apparently, getting rid of the virus was more important than the civil rights of the citizenry and the jobs of 229,000 people. It might seem a bit dangerous to have police barging into people's homes anytime they feel like it, but she took care of that problem by disarming the population a few months earlier. New Zealand believes they've eliminated the virus within their borders, but they have a bit of a problem now. And the problem is that there's still lots of virus outside of their borders. The people of New Zealand have essentially no immunity to the virus, and if the virus gets back in, the country is likely to be devastated. So New Zealand has painted themselves into a corner. They have to keep their borders closed. They have to keep international tourism shut down. They have to keep 229,000 people from earning a living. And another big problem with keeping their borders closed is they're not being exposed to new strains of flu and other viruses, so they're going to become very vulnerable to those viruses as well. When Europeans arrived in North America, Native Americans were decimated by smallpox and the flu, which they had no immunity to because they had been isolated from them. The longer that New Zealand stays isolated, the more difficult it becomes for them to open up. The Prime Minister's singular obsession with getting rid of the virus has put New Zealand in a very precarious situation moving forward. Now let's compare what New Zealand did versus what they did in Sweden. Sweden took the exact opposite approach. They never closed their borders, they never closed most of their schools, they never shut down their restaurants, and they never locked down. Their scientist in charge, Dr. Anders Tegnell, recognized that the only way a country can get past an epidemic like this is for the population to reach herd immunity. It was well known since early days of this epidemic that the disease was primarily a threat to elderly people with pre-existing conditions. So the Swedish strategy was to isolate elderly people and try to get the low-risk population exposed to the virus so that they would get to herd immunity. Sweden didn't do a perfect job, and a lot of nursing homes got infected. They had a big spike in deaths back in April. But since then, deaths have declined, and now they're having almost none. This graph shows daily deaths in Sweden from January through July. The purple line is 2020, and the green line is the 2015 to 2019 average. You can see that from January through mid-March, Sweden was having a lower number of deaths than average. Then there was a spike for a few weeks, but over the last 6 weeks, Sweden has been having lower than average deaths again. The total number of excess deaths so far this year in Sweden is less than 3,000. And many of those deaths were very old, sick people in nursing homes who probably would have died this year anyway. So with death counts currently running below average, it's pretty likely that Sweden will end up the year with a death count which is not significantly different from the 2015 to 2019 average. Things are looking pretty good in Sweden. The population understands that they're safe from the virus now, and that it's okay to keep their borders open and get on with their lives. This is the exact opposite of New Zealand, where the people are afraid of the virus and feel like they need to keep their borders closed. Dr. Anders Tegnell and the Swedish government have done an incredible job getting to this point, and they exhibited great bravery in achieving it because their press corps and many politicians attempted to sabotage their efforts. On May 10th, Sweden's biggest daily newspaper predicted nearly 100,000 people would die in Sweden from COVID-19 by July. Like newspapers all over the world, they were trying to intimidate the government into locking down the people and taking away their civil rights. But Anders Tegnell and the government stuck with science and ignored the left-wing propaganda. The press is always looking for ways to take people's civil rights and freedom away. Kudos to the Swedish government for not giving in to the press corps' lies and fear-mongering. The people of Sweden have been rewarded for their bravery. Let's take a look at what life in Stockholm is like now. That's what herd immunity looks like, and it's what America used to look like back when the government allowed people to have fun. Now let's compare what actually happened in Sweden to what the models predicted. Modelers predicted a huge spike in the number of ICU patients in Sweden because they didn't lock down. These gray lines show the predictions, and the blue line shows what actually happened. The modelers had no clue what they were talking about. This is basically the same situation as climate science. Agenda-driven academic modelers making baseless predictions of doom. Sweden thought through the long-term consequences of their actions and took a science, human rights-based approach, the exact opposite of what happened in New Zealand. The New Zealand Prime Minister reached for the precious and destroyed the livelihoods of at least 229,000 people, with no path forwards. Her singular obsession was the exact opposite of the well-thought-out, science-based approach taken in Sweden. Toto is always thinking ahead, and he very much appreciates what they did in Sweden. He thinks it's very unfortunate that Sweden had to act alone, and that so few other countries showed any signs of intelligence during this epidemic. You can visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.